Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. So glad you're with us on Life Support, and this program's a little different than some you might hear. We like to tell stories about how Jesus Christ enters into trauma and suffering, and we learn so much more about His work and glorifying Him because life sometimes just simply isn't easy. And we hear some great stories of how God has worked, and we're going to do that today. My guest is David Johnson. He was here last time too, and David, welcome back. It's so good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, you're bravely telling your story, and just to give you a quick recap, David rose through the business ranks, had a very, very good job, found that you weren't fulfilled inside. In fact, that you were quite miserable. And you were surprised by that a little bit because you'd worked so hard to get to where you were. And maybe you can just pick it up briefly right there about what happened next, just as a recap so we can get caught up. But at that moment, everything started to unravel, right?
Yeah, everything unraveled for me. I lost my job. My story was told on the news, in the newspapers. I had people that I thought I was close with, that I lost contact with. I lost my family, and certainly felt embarrassed, isolated, and alone at that moment.
Yeah, it does sound like that's because everything that you had pinned your hopes to was all of a sudden gone.
Yes, everything that I had worked, 30, 40 years towards, spent, day and night, working long hours, weekends, everything that I did that pointed to that apex, that zenith of my career, all of a sudden was gone in, minutes, hours. Everything that I had put blood, sweat, and tears into was gone that quickly. Wow.
But God wasn't gone. And you ran into an old friend who introduced you to Christ, right? And,
correct.
So God maneuvered that and changed your life.
Changed my life for the greatest part of my life now, which is happening now. As I mentioned last time, God was not in my life at all. Old Testament, New Testament. You were speaking German to me. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know God to miss Him, and so when my friend Brian Hicksath reached out to me and talked about seeing the world from a different point of view and living your life in a different kind of way, he saved me, and I can't minimize that at all. He literally saved me because I was going down a horrible path, and when I accepted Christ into my life, all things changed for the good. Even despite my circumstances and even knowing where I was going to be headed and spending the next 22 months of my life, I felt some security and safety knowing that God was there, God was in my life, and He had my back.
It's interesting. We all want to be saved, but we don't want to go through the hardships sometimes that salvation, it comes with it, because a lot of times God has to take us to a point where we have nowhere else to turn. Mm-hmm. Did you find that to be true in your situation?
Yeah, it's funny. I think had I continued to go where I was going, God would never have been in my life. Mm-hmm. He would not have been in my children's life in all likelihood. And so even despite this horrible situation that happened, self-inflicted, I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me because God was now in my life. And I was seeing things in a different way. And certainly as we were doing our work inside prison, we were expanding the kingdom. And so God uses you as a conduit to reach out to others. And I felt like that's what I and others were doing. And that never would have happened had I been on that other path. And maybe I wouldn't have gotten caught, and I would have continued to go down that path. It would have been a very empty life. Mm-hmm. What I'm doing today, despite having nothing, is much more fulfilling.
Yeah. What was it like to have to come back into the world after being in prison, you had this, you had a big job. You'd gone through this kind of personal embarrassment. You go to prison, you have great success there. Like you talked about, spreading the kingdom, Bible studies, all of that. Now all of a sudden you're back into society. What was that like for you?
Much more difficult than I thought. While we were in prison, we were always told of, this won't define you. You'll have second chances. You'll get back on your feet. And that may be true, and it certainly has, things are going well, but it was very difficult. After you leave prison, if you leave via work release, you spend, at least in my situation, I spent 8 months in a halfway house. And so while I was at that halfway house, kind of the policy for that, or procedure for that particular halfway house, is that you can't leave until you have a job. And so one of the biggest challenges in reentry is finding a job, because when you're a felon, many employers will not hire you because of your criminal history. And I know we had the movement to ban the box, but I don't think people realize that's not as successful as you might think, because in today's world, I can Google you, and I can find out whatever I want to find out about you prior to that interviewing process beginning or being initiated. And so that's a challenge, just trying to find a job, to find an employer that's willing to give you a second chance. At the same time, you're also trying to find a place to live. And it's the same thing. Renters cannot discriminate based on race and national origin, sex, and all of that, but it's pretty vague on criminal history. And so often you're not going to get a true answer in terms of why you didn't get that place. But I think for many of us, we suspect it was because of our criminal history. So you're already behind trying to find a job and trying to find a place to live in that halfway house. And you're desperately trying to do that because you want to be able to get out there and see your family again. So you're out, but you're not really out. So that was a challenge. And you almost felt like you're back in prison all over again, because the housing arrangements, at least where I was, you started in a 6-man or an 8-man room, so you're on top of each other. As you're there longer or people leave, you start to get into a 4-man, then a 2-man, and then ultimately a 1-man, but you're on top of each other. When I came out was right in the middle of COVID, so it was even harder to get out there and try to find a job. And it was even harder to try to connect with people because we had to be a certain distance away. So challenges that everyone in the world face, but especially so when you're incarcerated or in a halfway house.
Those are all things that we don't think about often. And how can the Christian community, do you think, come around prisoners that are trying to find their way as they're trying to work their way back into society?
Well, I think things like Lifeblood series, I think activity like you mentioned with you and your wife when you came back to Faribault to talk to the inmates, we need that. We need the inspiration. We need someone or a group that's going to support you. What's amazing is folks have been in prison for a very long time. So when they come out, the days of filling out an application are over. You go to the internet and go to the computer. So many people didn't even know how to turn on a computer. So that's where some of the folks were at as they were reentering into the workforce, or into the world, I should say. The faith-based programs that we had in prison were no longer there. That was our rock. That was our foundation. To have a group of individuals or individual come in and have some fellowship, that was all missing when we got to the halfway house. And so we felt almost like we're right back where we started, all alone once again, without the structure and the foundation there to help us. And so I think helping people find jobs, helping people complete an application, some basic stuff, helping people interview. What does an interview look like? How do I dress? What do I say? And then having the ability to have that fellowship and those relationships, those meaningful relationships again, and helping us connect with others that can help us out here, find a place to live, find a place to work.
You mentioned last time that before this all took place, you were kind of living this life where you were presenting on the outside, but inside you were a completely different person. Then you went to prison, you felt that weight off your shoulders. When you got out and you now had a criminal history and you had to try to maneuver in society, was there a temptation to do that again, kind of in a reverse way, because afraid to tell people who you really are, or afraid to let them know your background, or had you kind of settled that already in your mind?
I thought I had settled that in my mind, but when I got out and was in the halfway house and then walking around in the world, I did have those feelings come back again, where I began to be protective again. However, we started our own Bible study again in the halfway house, and as we were sharing, exchanging our stories, what's working, what's not, we all came to the conclusion, we can't hide it, and why should we? We made a mistake. We're asking for a second chance. We're different people now. I'm a different person now. And so I don't know when that epiphany hit me, but certainly shortly after I had been in the halfway house for a period of time, I thought, I'm not hiding anymore. I made that mistake once. I'm not going to make that mistake again. And I've been pretty straightforward and frontal about who I am, what I did, what I learned from that, and how I'm moving, certainly moving forward. I'm a different person. God is in my life. Creating incredible relationships with my sons again.
Oh, good.
So now I'm almost proud of what has happened, because not many people face adversity. Many people get knocked on their feet and are able to get back up. I felt like I got back up. And for my sons, I'm a living testimony of what not to do. And if you do find yourself in a bind, here's some of the things you can do to get out from underneath that. And so my sons and I attend church regularly. That wasn't happening before. And so I think we talked about this before, Pastor Paul. Had this not have happened, I'm not sure where I would have ended up. And so for me, despite those trials and tribulations, I'm in a much better place.
How long did it take you to develop that relationship with your sons after getting out of prison? Was that already in process while you were in prison?
Yeah, that was already in process when I was in prison. I talked to them literally every day. While you're in prison, you get a 15-minute call a day. And so I took full advantage of that. So every day I would call them and we'd have conversations. They would come and visit. And so they were younger, so a lot of curiosity about, what was going on inside, and, who's your friend? Do you like that guy who just walked by? And then through the halfway house, I would talk to them every day. And so probably the biggest moment is when I got out. I took them to school, and so on their first day, and so that just brought joy to me. And then the following Sunday, we went to church and prayed about just our successful week and being happy about where we are today.
Normalcy.
Yeah. Exactly. And just as they grew, just having adult conversations with your sons, it was amazing.
Yeah. Well, God continues to work in all these different situations, and you're a living testament of that. And your story is one that resonates with a lot of people when you talk about adversity, because everyone faces some kind of adversity. We don't like to talk about it very much sometimes. And we look around our churches and people feel like everyone's got their lives together, so they don't like to show who they really are. But what's going on behind those smiling faces a lot of times are some pretty difficult things. How have you been able to give back to people based on what you've learned through this whole experience?
I think, first of all, how I've been able to give back is just to tell my story, because like you said, a lot of people don't want to pull that curtain. On the outside, they're all smiles and everything looks, American pie and milk and cookies. And certainly for some, that's quite the opposite is happening in their lives. So a lot of it is just having that conversation and telling people, here's my story, here's what I've learned. Please don't make the same mistake. And one of the mistakes I made was thinking I could do this on my own, thinking that I didn't need to talk or share what was going on in my life with anyone. One of the things that I've done, and I tell people about all the time, is that I've formed kind of my own board of directors. And so when you think of companies, they have their board of directors that provide guidance, making sure that company's on the right path, that they're doing the right things in business and in the community. Well, I've formed my own board of directors. So, Brian Hegseth is one of those individuals that is in my board of directors. I have a couple of close friends and a pastor, and there's about 6 of them. And I meet with them regularly, and we just talk. And sometimes it could be about a basketball game. It might not be about God or anything else, but we just get together and talk and just make sure that we're open and we're sharing and exchanging and telling our story. And I encourage others to do the same. Don't keep it in. Form your own board of directors, so to speak. You're not alone. People are there. People want to help. But they can't help you if they don't know what kind of trials and tribulations you're going through.
Yeah.
And I always think of Paul, too. I can do this through him who strengthens me.
Yeah.
So I tell that story all the time.
Yeah. Well, Paul spent time in chains, and so he kind of understood what that whole thing was all about.
Right.
So do you ever worry that you're going to go back to the person you were? And how do you kind of wrestle with, moving forward and seeing yourself continuing to get closer and closer to Christ and so forth?
I don't worry about that at all because of my relationship with Christ. I pray every day. Like I said, I have my board of directors that are there to support me. So I don't have those worries, but I worry about people that I spent time with that haven't connected with God, because everything when you get out of prison is set up against you. It's hard to find a job because of your record. It's hard to find a place to live because of your record. You can't vote until you're off paper. It's almost this perpetual punishment that you can't seem to get underneath from. My release paperwork, my crime is theft, yet I had this whole checkbox of items that I could not do. I could not have alcohol. I could not be in a bar. I could not have weapons. Stuff I wouldn't do anyway.
Yeah, but restrictive.
It just felt like trappings for individuals. So let's just throw everything at you that you can't do, despite the fact your infraction is a small piece over here. So it feels like it's trappings to return people back to prison. And I think that's why recidivism is so high. But it's less and lower with those folks that partake in faith-based programs. And so I try to deliver that message to people that I see, that I spent time with all the time. Again, trying to expand the kingdom, but also trying to help those individuals on the right path. And
the company that you're that's recording us on video right now, Five Stone Media, is the author of Lifeblood curriculum, and you found that to be incredibly helpful, didn't you?
It was a life changer for me, and I think if we could set up these Lifeblood programs throughout the city or throughout the country for folks that are reentering into the workplace, I think the success rate would be immense. I think that's what we're missing. You're alone so much during that time. You come out and you're alone again if you haven't found that fellowship. And like I said, my time with Lifeblood or with Bible study, it was more than just that. It was an opportunity to learn about other people's talents and assets, share your own, and in that, build each other up. We talked about life. We talked about family. We talked about friendship. And it was a connection that was transformational. It's a connection that I still have with many of the individuals that I spent time with in prison. It's a connection that I'll never forget. And sometimes we just see each other in passing, and it's just an eye look, and it's that look that
Yeah, I know.
we're one.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know.
Yeah, we know.
We're
It's
in the
exactly it. We know.
Yeah.
And so I fear for people that haven't had that experience, that haven't had that opportunity that I had.
Yeah. Well, God is always working around the edges. I remember, our family was on the other side of the equation. We were the victims trying to relate to our perpetrator, and so they had this, justice thing, for victims, and this was in British Columbia, Canada, and we're meeting our officer for the first time, and we're going to go visit this guy that did this, and he goes, oh, by the way, he goes like, British Columbia doesn't know this, but both of us are pastors, the two of us that work here. And so we understand what you're trying to do. Yeah. And I thought, what are the odds? And, there's 5 million people that live there, and the government has no interest in whatsoever of hiring believers. And here are the two people working with us that are both pastors, former pastors. And so, God is always there. He's always doing that kind of crazy stuff.
Right.
And just when we start to think that he's bowed out, he just comes up with another good idea.
Yes.
And all of a sudden he shows up.
Yes. Yes. And I also found that he has a sense of humor, too. When I went to the halfway house, the place that I worked at that I got fired from, when I looked out my window at the halfway house, I could see the front of the building. And so I could tell there was a sense of humor that every time I woke up or went to bed, there's where it happened.
There it is, yeah.
But for me, I took that to mean, don't be ashamed. Tell your story. Mm-hmm. There's no reason to hide. You're out there. Just let people know. And so that's kind of my model, and hopefully my way of helping others. If they can see that I can be open, that I can share, even things that are embarrassing, that maybe they can too. It's similar to watching John Turnipseed and others on Lifeblood. Yep. Watching them, I had hope. If they could do it, I can too. Well, if people see me and go, well, he can share his story, embarrassing as it is, as hurtful as it was, if he can do that, why not me?
Yeah. No reason for shame.
No reason for shame. I have no shame.
Forgiven by Christ. Yep.
Yes.
Well, you're an amazing guy, David. Thank you so much for dropping by, and I wish you the very best. I think your story is going to help a lot of people. Just keep telling it and do it, and just be yourself, because you have a very compelling story. And I think the thing that just I love by talking to you is just very honest. You're upfront. You're just who you are. And I think you've had to learn how to do that, but you've gotten there. Yeah. So well done.
Thank you. I appreciate that.